quick recap on where we were. We'd finished building the main body, in as much as this was together, and the wood formers were in place. One thing I have done off camera is I fitted the two lights. Don't know if that's visible there. I fitted the two lights that are supplied by the manufacturer. They've already got all the relevant parts, and they come wired with a very long wire. It's absolutely massive. It can reach right to the front here. So I'm probably just going to wrap this up and cable tie it, because it's going to fit onto a spare socket right here on the flight controller. The other things to do is, obviously I've got to cut this. This is way too long. I don't need such a long ESC, so I'm going to cut that shorter and fit a new plug to plug into the flight controller, and these need to be cut shorter to solder straight onto the back of the flight controller. So that's where we are with the body. And the next thing, oh, by the way, I found out about the wedge. It needs to be the thicker side on the plane's left, on the port side of the plane. So it wants the motor to be slightly angled. I'll exaggerate it here. Slightly angled to the right. Fine, yeah, I can live with that. There's no problem. So that's where we are with that. I'll put that aside. The next thing we need to do is test the electronics, because the one thing that you should never do is just put everything into a plane without testing it, because it's always going to go wrong somewhere. So here is the electronics exactly as per the diagram, and what I've done here while I'm being off camera is, apart from the two servos to the wings, is I've just made the cables up to match the length I'm going to need. The GPS comes with this rather nasty cable. It's not silicone, it's hard, but it's a fair length, and I'm going to put that out in the wing. So that's going to go out in the wing, the left wing, and then the crossfire receiver is going to go out in the right wing. So these have quite long cables here. As you can see, that sort of matches. That's going to go there. That's going to go out on the wing, and that's going to go out on the other wing. So, and I've wired it all together, and I've temporarily put on a power cable. This is not the one I'm going to be using, obviously. No, this is not the one I'm going to be using. And anyway, it will be going that way. But just for testing, I've fitted everything on. So we've got the camera and the DJI unit going in. We've got the crossfire receiver going in here. Two servos on S3 and S4. And then we've got the power to the GPS on the motor here, and the power to the DJI on the battery point here, and the GPS here. Now, because of the shortage of pins, I basically separated all the powers onto 2-pin connectors, and the data onto their own 2 pins. So there's both the GPS, the crossfire, and the DJI camera. They all require data, so transmit and receive. Nice thing about on 2 pins is if it doesn't work, you just flip them over, assuming you've configured it right in the system. Now, I've tested all this. It does work, but one thing you should do before you put any power on is either have a smoke stopper unit, or in my case a multimeter, and you want to stick it on continuity. Don't know if you can see that. Let's put that in a place where hopefully one of the cameras can see it. And if you got, oh, wonderful, it's broken. Right, best laid plans. Basically the continuity is if it goes together, it will make a beep. Of course I can't get it to go, but yeah. And what you do with that is you stuff them, I'll have to repair that later. You stuff them into the connectors on the battery, and you shouldn't have a connection. If you've got a capacitor, you may see briefly a connection, it will fade away as the capacitor charges up. But basically you shouldn't see any connection between these two, because everything's going through the circuitry, so there should be resistance, etc. If you see a short on that, then you've got a short somewhere on here, and if you put power to it that's uncontrolled, i.e. not through a smoke stopper, then the magic smoke will come out of all this. But as it happens, this is all working, so I can, I wonder if I can get this on camera. So I've made a copy of one of my existing planes.
Welcome to HTX, Acro mode on, disarmed.
I've got a temporary picture in there at the moment. So if I take a battery to this and connect it up, everything connects up. I get a green light on the receiver, so it's connected to the crossfire. I've got a green light, well, we'll have a green light on the, there we go, a green light on the DJI. I've got data coming in and out from here. That should start flicking quickly in a moment. I'm not convinced that's working yet. And on the servos, they're all working. So I'm pretty happy with that. If I start the goggles up, I have seen a picture. So that's pretty good. I'm still not convinced on that GPS. I expect faster flashy on that. And the way to check that on GPS is just literally to look at your GPS, and you should see packets coming in and out. If you got on U-Block 7, you should see 10 a second. If you're on regular U-Blocks, it's 5 a second. Anyway, everything's good on that, so the electronics are good. Now I've turned that off. This should now say
telemetry lost.
Telemetry lost. So
goodbye.
The receiver is correctly talking to the crossfire, and it correctly identified that I turned the receiver off. So electronics, all good. Now I know I've got good electronics and they all work. The next stage is to start planning and cutting the wings to accommodate the GPS and the crossfire. Sorry about my squeaky chair. One day I will replace it. Right, so being right-handed, I tend to toss with my right hand from a wing. On a wing, I tend to hold the wing and just throw it that way, which means I don't want the crossfire catching on my hand. So I tend to put the crossfire on the left wing. Now these are servos on the top part of the surface, so I tend to put crossfire on the left wing and the GPS on the right wing. I don't like cutting too much on the top surface, so I'm going to be cutting in on the bottom, which is where the servo wire runs. And I took a picture up against the light, which is here, and as you can see there's an awful lot of carbon in these wings, which is great. It's going to keep them very strong, but it also means it's more difficult to arrange where you're going to put things. So the crossfire, let's do the crossfire first. I'll just disconnect it from the flight controller. This is the crossfire. I need to allow a fair bit to come into the fuselage and plug onto the flight controller. Here is where the servo is, so I can't put it there. So I can either put it this side and have the crossfire right on the very tip of the wing, which isn't the worst place. Crossfire really interferes with GPS more than anything else, so you really want to keep the crossfire away from the GPS, which will be over this wing. Or I can put the crossfire receiver here and run the cable over and have this about halfway down this wing. Now obviously this sticking up and down, and it's always vertical, this sticking up and down in the wing vertically causes disturbance in the airflow, so if you have it right out here, it's more of a twist on the airflow, so not sure if you want that. So let's have a think. Crossfire, so that would be, that's too close. So I am going to go with putting the crossfire receiver here, and when you put crossfire receivers in, always put it with the antenna facing you, because sometimes you might need to rebind, and you might need to get to that button. So it's best to have it mounted up. So I'm going to put it between this carbon bar and this routing for here. So I'm going to put it about here, and I'm going to make a hole for the antenna here. So that's pretty good. And all I do now is just take a little pen, fairly fine tip, and I just draw around what I need. So this is a hole that I'm going to need. Obviously this bit doesn't need to go all the way through, so I'm going to put it on the underside. So here's my, let's straighten that up. Here's my crossfire receiver hole. And I'm just going to look at that against the light. No, I'm not going to come into this area. I don't want to ingress onto that. So that's going to be that. And the best way of making holes in EPP wings or EPO wings is to use a little technique called, well, I don't know if it's called anything, but I've just put a new sharp blade on this, and I'm just going to cut about 5 millimeters in, and I'm using my finger to stop me cutting too deep. So I'm just running and using the finger as a guide to the depth. I'm going to go around the outside like the Buffalo Girls, and then I'm going to, about 5 millimeter distance, just cut across, and then on this side I'm going to cut, well, this, because it's quite a small one, I'm going to cut down the middle. So I've cross hatched all that. I'm then going to get a pair of needle nose pliers, push in down the cross hatches that I can see, grip it, twist, grip it, twist. I'm just going to do that for all the pieces, and if you cut to a consistent depth, the floor of this is fairly flat. And what I do after that is I tend to take a Dremel with a little abrasion tool and just run it gently over to smooth off the base. I won't do that here now because it makes an awful lot of noise. Or I might do it, but there you are. I've taken out a load of little cubes of foam. They can go in the bin, don't need them. And now I've got a place to put the receiver. Brilliant. Next thing, place the receiver, the antenna wire. Don't want to run it too close there. And then decide a hole where you're going to make the hole for the antenna. So I'm going to put the hole there. And again, every time you mark something, hold it up to the light, look for the carbon. That's a good place for the hole for the antenna. And we're just going to pretty much run a cable run like that, because the antenna comes out at an angle out of that and into there. And the best way to cut a little channel like that is with a hot wire. But do I have one handy? Probably not. I don't have a hot wire handy, but I do have a sacrificial screwdriver. Brilliant. And little chef's blowtorch. Absolutely great for heating up something like this. You don't need to get it too hot because the foam will melt really easily. So let's take it up to that, and I'm just going to plunge it as straight as I can through the wing. Have I come out the other side? I have. Right, so I'm just going to give that a twist. I'm going to give it do it a second time because I want a little bit thicker, a little bit more. And notice I'm only heating the end of the screwdriver, so my hand is protected from any heat there. And I'm just going to plunge it through again, give it a little wiggle to open it up, and then I'm going to cut a shaft like that. Needs a little bit more heat. This will just be the antenna cable notch. If you don't have it too hot, it won't make too much of a mess here. I need a little bit more heat on that. Ooh, smoky. That's just a little bit of the EPP. Right. And then I need to cut the next hole. That will go in there. Try not to hurt myself. And then I need to just arrange for that to go from there up to there. So this is really very easy to do. Just take your time over it. Because it's easy to melt the plastic, which you can't put it back there. And I'm also going to just expand that a little bit. That slot they give you, just going to make that a little bit wider. Because obviously it's now going to take both the servo and the leads for the crossfire. Let's have a look at that. So crossfire is going to go in there. Cable's going to run up there and through there. And you can, if you push it in a bit, don't cut it too big because then you can actually push the cable into the hole. Might make this a little bit deeper. That can come out of there. And then you feed the aerial through like that, just push it. You get a nice clean area at the top. You want to keep the top surface as clean as possible. It's less important with the bottom surface. I think I'll just make this a little bit bigger just to allow that to be sunken in a little bit more, but we're close. These are great, these little chef units. So make that a little bit bigger and make that a little bit deeper. Super! So now we've got, that's all the cutting I need to do for the crossfire, and when I'm finished I shall be I'm planning on laminating the front edge and I might laminate all the way back just to here, and then what you can do is you can make a slit in the lamination, fit your electronics, and then use some packing tape over the top of it. That way you can always take your packing tape off and get to your electronics without having to take all your laminate off. And that just fits in there, and the packing tape will help hold that in place. It's looking pretty good. And there we are. Little spot of E6000 just to hold that cable down, and that will run that way. Perfect. Okay, so that's the side for the crossfire done, and we're going to do a very similar thing for the GPS. There's the GPS one, here it is. So GPS, I think I'm going to mount in this area here. It gets too close here to, there's a carbon pole here, it makes a nice triangle here where I can cut without hitting anything, or a triangle over here, and that, I don't need it that far out. GPS is just, we're cutting into the bottom of the wing, so we have to put the active element, that's the antenna for the GPS. We want that facing upwards to pick up the satellites. So again, I'm going to, you come through this part, and I'm just going to mount that in there somewhere like that. And that gives us plenty to connect to the flight controller. So let's mark that up. Let's just have a quick look at that. Yeah, that's going to fit nicely into that. Especially now, and now if you can see, I don't know if you can see with this light, it's quite rough, the bottom of this. So I'm just going to get, well, I say a Dremel, it's a Lidl look-alike Dremel. Same job, it fits all the same parts. Work zone from Lidl. This has been absolutely excellent tool. I'm so glad I bought it. Take that out, alright. And what you're doing here is it's not so much an abrasive effect, it's more using the little heat build-up you can get from rubbing one of these stones. This is one of the stones I use. Yeah, and we just plonk it in there, tighten that up, and it's a very gentle touch. You want a sort of medium speed, and all I'm going to do is just pass that over like this, just to flatten that area, and I'll show you what it comes out after. Apart from that little bit there, it actually, because it sort of slightly melts the surface, you get a smoother finish. So that's fairly smooth now. And that will take the GPS clean, nice and cleanly. I think I'm going to go just a little bit further down. And you can see that's a very neat job now. So if I just test that, that's going to work just nice. Next thing is to cut a channel for that. You can use, I'm just, while I've got the Dremel out, I'm just going to do the base of this as well. So what do I need for this piece? I need to cut a little bit here. to allow for the plug. Now I need to run it to here. So we'll run it from there to there. So we're going to cut a little piece off here and run it into there. Cut a little piece off. Some plug, and then out with the sacrificial screwdriver again, and that should now fit in nicely. And you're looking to try and get it fairly flush with the underside of the wing, so again, once it's covered over with tape, you won't have a problem. Job done. So that's the fitting of the GPS and the crossfire antenna. So the wings are now modified for that. Great. What to do next? Let's fit the servos. Now some wings have little cutouts here so you can screw on the ends or adjust the ends. I've already set the center points on these. That's center on the receiver. So I'm just going to screw in the retaining part. So the number of times I've forgotten to do that, I must admit, terrible. So using the sacrificial screwdriver. Some people have bent screwdrivers, some people have orange screwdrivers or whatever. I have a sacrificial screwdriver and this is annoying me, so out with the blue tack to hold it steady. And that's just going to screw that into place. For this model, these Emax servos are just wonderful. They're digital and also metal geared throughout, all the way down. I've noticed that some of the Tower Pro Metal Gear MG90s, they look Metal Gear at the top, but if you open them up, they're actually plastic inside, which is just cheating. So these are Metal Gear throughout, worth paying a little bit more for them. Because, you know, obviously these servos are doing double duty for elevator and aileron. You want them to work well. Right. The way we fit these servos, it could be made for these servos, this model. They fit absolutely beautifully. I don't like the labels. Because it's the underside, there's a hole. You feed the servo leads through, and the servo just fits nice and snugly in the wing. And it couldn't fit more, literally couldn't fit better, could it? And the other wing, and they are such a perfect fit, these Emax. I've got a feeling they were actually designed for these Emax. And what's the model? They're Emax. Oh gosh, my eyes. ES08 M for metal, DI D2 ES08 MD double I, so 2. And I love them. They're absolutely brilliant. They've got so much torque for their size. Put them through, snug them down, and just check they fit nicely. Of course they do. And then you can just feed that servo lead into the existing slot, which they nicely give you. and there's our expanded slot that will accommodate both the servo and the crossfire. Don't be afraid to cut into that, and just make certain it fits nice. And the smoother you can make this, the better it will fly. So So the question is, what we're going to use to fit these servos into the wing. My answer is E6000. Of course, E6000. So that fits, we know it's going to fit, so I'm going to take it out, pull it out gently, drop of the old E6000. If I can undo it, yes. Sometimes I can't even take the top off, it glues itself in. Don't put much, just a smattering, that's all you need. For one day you may want to take this out. I notice I didn't clean the plastic either. In this case I want not to hold too tightly, because I may want to take them out. So in, out a couple of times, spread it around. No all contact adhesives, that it has some air. We'll do the same with this one. That's had long enough to go tacky on me. So we'll just feed these into their holes. Feed the cable down. The second time, we know it fits. So it's just a case of putting it in and slotting it down. Good enough. There's only one part of this kit that I am definitely not going to be using their component on, and I'll show you that in a moment. So that's laid in. Need to put them to one side just to get full tension. And let me address the quality in the boom. And on the parts they give you, they give you these horns, servo horns, not servo horns, wing horns, that just glue into the wing. I'm not a fan of that because that's not the worst, but I don't like it. But the worst thing is this. By putting a fold in, which is a traditional way of adjusting length, by closing this up or opening it, you're basically putting a spring inside your controls. Really don't like that, so I won't be using either of them. And because I'm a total hoarder, I just looked in my spares box and I come up with the following. What I'll be putting in its place are these. These control horns go through and they mount to a plane the other side. So I will be gluing and screwing. Sounds rude. And I've got a control rod with a nice twist, and I've added some fuel tubing on the end to hold them in. So that's what I'll be adding to the plane to do the controls. I've mounted the flight controller onto the plywood base. I've used nylon 3M screws, and I put a little drop of super glue just to stop them coming off. I've soldered on the battery connector in the other direction, so it will connect up to the battery that will be in front of the flight controller. I've added a 1000 microfarad, that's it, 1000 microfarad capacitor across 2 of the ESC connectors. It's just good practice. It cuts down noise, generally noise produced by the motor. It's already got 2 capacitors on. I'm just adding another one. The motor I've connected to the other ESC pad, and I've shortened its motor controller and plugged that into servo 3, or motor 1, which is on West 1. Anyway, that's the motor controller. You've got first 2 on motor 1, motor 2, then S3 is the left hand and S4 is the right hand. I've put a couple of small 3mm cable ties just to wrap up this cable for the lights. I think I'm going to be plugging that into the second one there, yeah. So that's going to go there. So, quick test. When I connect up a battery to this, let's just have a quick check. Visual check. All the negatives are going to negatives, all the positives are going to positives. The cables I've connected, that's going negative, positive. So hopefully we'll see the lights come on the back of the vehicle when I plug this in. Yay! We have lights. So that's working. The next thing is to glue this rear motor mount on. And because I want this to be really solid, I am going to clean this with isopropyl alcohol before I glue it on. This has had long enough to go off, and I've got to push this on pretty quick. And I know it sounds like a waste of tape, but I don't want that shifting now. So I am going to take that down. This is becoming very close to a flyable plane. How wonderful. There we go. Next thing to do, because I've got that tape down, I can go on to the next thing, I think. And that's attaching the motor to the rear of the plane. Now I have, as I said at the beginning, I now know that the little shim they give you is an angle. Surprisingly, I've never done it with a pusher, but it is an angle, and they want you to put the thick part to the left of the model, so the motor tips over, yeah, to the right. So, looking at this very closely, it is a very, very slight shim. I don't know if you can see that at all. Let me show it against a white, something white. So it's very slightly thicker here. Very slightly thicker. Small one. And of course I can't find my 1.5mm hex drivers. There they are. Let's have a look. That's a 1.5. No, it's not 1.5. Maybe it's 2mm hex driver. These are great. These are tungsten tipped, so they don't round off. Yeah, that's a good fit. So I want there's a little notch there for the cables to run through. So I'll run that through. Slightly thicker to the left of the model, which is that way. It's awkward, isn't it? That looks like an afterthought, doesn't it? It's like, oh shit, it's not flying quite right. Let's stick on a shim. Sorry if you can't see what I'm doing, it's really quite fiddly. No, don't want that one. That one. got that shim in the wrong place. I've got the shim is actually thin at the top. Oh, I hate that shim already. Of course I haven't put that tight in yet, so that's easy enough to sort out. Tell you what, I'll cut away and next time, next cut, it'll be all done as if by magic. There we go. And as you can see, there's a slight twist to that side. It's very minor, but that's what the instructions say. So that's all done. So we now have a flight controller in place, the lights, the ESC set, the motors in place, the cabling is, well, it's fine. Just tuck that in there. It's nice and neat. It's quite a nice motor in as much it's got that little bar over the top to stop the cable going into the bell of the motor. So the next thing I think is to fit the magnets that hold the lid on. Now I have a thing about magnets, because obviously you want them to go the right way and grip and not go the wrong way and repel. So they're in a pack. Get a Sharpie or something like of that ilk and mark one side in each one. Just put a little dot on each one and go through them in the stack, marking the top of each one. It doesn't need to be that deep dark. You just want to be able to say, right, that's one side of them. Yep, there's a little mark on that one. So my fingers are now black with Sharpie. That means you'll always know which side is the one side. So I'm then going to put them in, and the ones in the other side, the black dots will be going inside. So the black dot will go into the top of the lid, and therefore you won't see the black dots anyway, but you'll know they're the right way round. When you install them on here, you want the black dots inside. Now I found with magnets the best glue is not E6000, oddly enough, because it doesn't glue metal that well. My fingers are totally marked. But the best glue is epoxy, and the best thing to mix epoxy on is silicone. This is actually a silicone table mat, cup mat, coaster. That's the word. And epoxy resin doesn't stick to it, so you can mix it up. Mix it all up, and when you're finished, it just peels off. So let's mix a bit of this. See if I've got enough. So we're just going to put just a little blob in each. Doesn't have to be a lot, because the magnets fit in quite snugly. Okay, and we'll put them in, and we'll put them in with the dot upwards. I can actually see the dot, but and then what I tend to do is just wipe over, and that sort of joins the top. So you almost get like a skin of epoxy on the top. Now that's not great, because when you try and epoxy sticks to epoxy even when it's dry. But I'll show you what I do with that. So same with the lid. Final one. There's the dot. The dot goes in. Spread these over. And then what I tend to do is choose a little bit of masking tape and just put it over the top. And this masking tape will stay there. It will glue down with the epoxy, and it will stop. It tends to stop the magnets popping out. Don't know if you always. I think everybody's had the effect of a magnet popping out when they've opened the lid on something. Well, this will stop that. And that keeps that in place. Now I've still got a little bit of glue left, so while I've got a bit of glue left I can fit in one other piece, and that is the hatch handle. That fits in there. It's quite tight anyway. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue. I don't think there's any problem. I don't think there's any chance of that coming out anyway. But it doesn't hurt to glue it in, just to add a little bit of glue on those surfaces. That's really quite tight. And since it's spread on the top, I'll just wipe that off. Great! Oh yeah, that's gripping nicely. Don't be tempted to put it on fully, because obviously the glue has not set off. Good way of knowing when your glue's set, when it's set on the coaster and starts peeling off the coaster, you know it's set there.